The call came on a Tuesday, cutting through the sterile silence of my London office like a shard of ice. Your father, he sold it, Julian. He sold the estate. My uncle Silas's voice, usually a comforting rumble, was a raw whisper, laced with disbelief and a pain that echoed my own dawning horror. The Oakhaven estate, not just a collection of bricks and mortar, but the very crucible of my family's legacy, my mother's cherished dream, and my own birthright was gone. Vanished to settle the debts of a woman my father barely knew, a mistress who had, for years, been a phantom threat, now solidified into a destroyer. My world, built on foundations I thought immutable, began to crumble into dust. I stared out at the indifferent cityscape, the Thames a silver ribbon below, and felt an emptiness bloom in my chest, vast and cold. It wasn't just the monetary value, though that was staggering. It was the absolute disregard, the brazen betrayal that cut the deepest. My father, Alistair Thorne, a man whose ambition had always been a double-edged sword, had finally used it to sever the last ties to his integrity and to me. He had often called me useless, a dreamer, unfit to manage the empire he'd built, yet it was he who had proven himself the ultimate destroyer. The irony was a bitter pill, one I knew I'd choke on for a long, long time. Oakhaven wasn't just a house. It was the house. A sprawling Georgian manor nestled in the rolling hills of Kent, its ancient oak trees whispered tales of generations of Thornes. My grandfather, Arthur Thorne, a man of quiet dignity and immense foresight, had acquired it after the war, pouring his heart and soul into its restoration. He'd envisioned it as the family seat, a place where future Thornes would gather, grow, and continue the legacy he'd so painstakingly built. When my mother, Ilara, married into the family, she fell in love with Oakhaven even more fiercely than my father had. She curated its gardens, filled its rooms with light and laughter, and made it a home, not just a monument. It was her sanctuary, her canvas, her enduring gift to us all. I remembered her hands, calloused from tending the rose bushes she adored, her eyes alight as she described plans for the conservatory, a place she dreamed of filling with exotic orchids. She had drawn up intricate blueprints, sketching out every detail, right down to the specific shade of azure for the tiles. After she passed, far too young, Oakhaven became a living memorial to her, a tangible piece of her spirit that lingered in every sun-drenched hallway and every rustling leaf. My grandfather, knowing how much it meant to me, and perhaps sensing my father's transactional nature, had specifically bequeathed Oakhaven to me in his will, with a life interest granted to my father, Alistair. The stipulation was clear. Alistair could live there, maintain it, but never sell it. It was my inheritance, secured, or so I thought, by legal ironclad. How could he? My voice was thin, reedy, barely my own. Grandfather's will. It explicitly stated. He found a loophole, Julian, Silas interjected, his voice heavy with resignation. A technicality, a minor clause about extraordinary circumstances allowing for a family council decision. He leveraged the board, the one he controls with an iron fist, convinced them it was a necessary financial maneuver for Thorne Holdings. He painted it as a strategic divestment, even hinted that it was a burden on the company. Of course, he omitted the part about his personal debts to that woman. The extraordinary circumstances clause, a relic from my great-grandfather's time, intended for true emergencies, war, famine, economic collapse, not for a man's reckless indulgences. My father, Alistair, had always been a master manipulator, a man who could twist words and bend wills until they conformed to his own. He built Thorne Holdings from a modest regional enterprise into a national powerhouse, but he did it with a ruthless efficiency that often left a trail of emotional wreckage. He was a shark in a tailored suit, charming one moment, utterly merciless the next. His ambition was boundless, his personal life, a chaotic landscape of fleeting affections and escalating debts, carefully hidden from public scrutiny. My own relationship with him had always been fraught. From childhood, I was measured against his impossible standards, found wanting. "You're too soft, Julian," he'd sneer, watching me read a book instead of practicing my golf swing. "Too emotional, you'll never have the stomach for business." He saw my artistic inclinations, my love for history, my introspective nature as weaknesses, not strengths. He wanted a carbon copy of himself, a ruthless successor, and I was decidedly not that. This constant belittling had driven a wedge between us, creating a chasm that only widened with each passing year. My escape into academia, then into a quiet, analytical role in corporate consulting, felt like a deliberate rebellion, a quiet assertion of my own path. I thrived on strategy, on dissecting complex problems, on building solutions for others, skills my father often dismissed as indirect or lacking real-world grit. And now this. The ultimate humiliation. Not just the loss of Oakhaven, but the blatant message behind it. Your inheritance means nothing. Your mother's memory means nothing. My personal gratification trumps all. It felt like a deliberate act of erasure, a final, definitive declaration of my worthlessness in his eyes. He wasn't just selling a property, he was selling off my past, my future, and what little respect I had left for him. The cold anger that had been simmering for years now surged, hot and fierce. It was a potent brew of grief, betrayal, and a newly ignited spark of defiance. He thought he could dismiss me, break me, but he had just made a profound miscalculation. Who bought it? I asked, my voice now steady, a dangerous calm settling over me. Silas hesitated. A shell company, very sophisticated, hard to trace. But the rumor is Alistair orchestrated the sale to a consortium, then pushed for a quick flip. He needed the cash fast, Julian. His mistress, a woman named Genevieve Dubois, apparently racked up astronomical gambling debts. He was desperate. Genevieve Dubois, the name tasted like ash. I had seen her once, fleetingly, at a charity gala my father insisted I attend. A woman of striking, if somewhat predatory, beauty, with eyes that seemed to constantly calculate. She draped herself over him, a crimson stain against his conservative suit, her laughter a little too loud, a little too artificial. I dismissed her then as another in a long line of fleeting distractions, never imagining the extent of her influence or the catastrophic cost she would exact. My father, for all his business acumen, was a fool for a pretty face and a seductive whisper. A weakness my mother had tolerated with a grace I could only now truly appreciate. The implications of Silas's words sank in, each one a hammer blow. My father, the shrewd businessman, had allowed himself to be bled dry by a woman, then sacrificed the family's most sacred asset to cover his folly. And in doing so, he had spit on my mother's grave, ridiculed my grandfather's legacy, and utterly decimated any remaining sliver of familial loyalty I might have harbored. The image of Oakhaven, vibrant with my mother's spirit, now felt tainted, defiled by his greed and weakness. A profound sense of isolation washed over me. My mother was gone. My grandfather, the true patriarch, had passed years ago. My father had chosen a mistress and her debts over his own son and the family's heritage. I was truly alone, left to contend with the wreckage. But with that isolation came a fierce clarity. This wasn't just about Oakhaven anymore. This was about respect, about justice, and about proving my father utterly, irrevocably wrong. He called me useless, but he had just underestimated the quiet resolve of the son he had cast aside. The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I would not let Oakhaven, or my mother's memory, be lost to his selfish whims. This was far from over. I hung up the phone, the city's ceaseless hum a distant drone. My gaze hardened, sweeping across the vast urban landscape. Somewhere in this intricate web of transactions and power plays, Oakhaven existed, a trophy snatched by a faceless entity. I would find it, and then I would make my father understand the true cost of his betrayal. The game had changed, and this time I wasn't just playing by his rules, I was rewriting them. My earliest memories of Oakhaven are a sun-drenched kaleidoscope. The scent of my mother's roses after a summer rain, the rough bark of the ancient oak I'd tried to climb, the hushed grandeur of the library where my grandfather Arthur would read me stories of valiant knights and faraway lands. Oakhaven wasn't merely a house. It was a living, breathing entity, a character in the grand narrative of my childhood. My grandfather, Arthur Thorne, was the true north of our family. A man of quiet strength, his wisdom was etched into the lines around his kind eyes. He'd built Thorne Holdings from a regional manufacturing plant into a respected national conglomerate, but he never let success harden his heart. He believed in integrity, in legacy, in nurturing talent, not just exploiting it. He saw something in me that my father, Alistair, often overlooked: a capacity for deep thought, a sensitivity that Arthur cherished. Julian has a good mind, he'd tell Alistair, and a kind heart. Those are strengths, not weaknesses. My father, Alistair, however, was a different breed of thorn. Brilliant, yes, but ruthless. Where Arthur built with patience and foresight, Alistair built with speed and aggression. He took Thorne Holdings to dizzying new heights, expanding into international markets, diversifying portfolios. He was lauded in the business world, a titan. At home, though, he was a storm front, unpredictable and demanding. He saw the world in stark black and white, winners and losers, and he desperately wanted me to be a winner in his mold. I was not. I was a quiet child, more at home with books than with ball games, more inclined to listen than to command. My mother, Ilara, was my sanctuary. She was sunshine and grace, an artist at heart, who found beauty in everything. She was the anchor that kept our family from drifting apart under the force of Alistair's ambition. She understood my quieter nature, fostered my love for art and history, and encouraged me to be myself. Your strength, Julian, she'd say, her fingers gently tracing my cheek, is your empathy. Never lose that. Oakhaven was her masterpiece. She transformed it, not with grand structural changes, but with an infusion of warmth and personality. The walled garden became her personal Eden, bursting with vibrant hues and intoxicating scents. The old stables were converted into a sprawling art studio where she painted abstract landscapes and sculpted delicate figures. Every corner of Oakhaven held a piece of her, a testament to her vibrant spirit. When she passed away from a sudden illness when I was 18, the light in Oakhaven dimmed, and a profound silence fell over its usually bustling halls. It was as if the very house mourned with us. My grandfather, knowing how much Oakhaven meant to my mother and me, and perhaps intuiting my father's increasing detachment, made a deliberate decision. In his will, he explicitly bequeathed Oakhaven to me, Julian Thorne, with a life interest granted to my father, Alistair. The legal wording, drafted by the formidable family solicitor, Mr. Abernathy, was unambiguous. Alistair could reside there, maintain it, but he could never sell, mortgage, or transfer ownership. It was to be held in trust for me. A legacy, Julian, grandfather had told me, his voice weak from his own illness, just months after my mother's passing. A piece of your mother always, and a foundation for your future. I cherished that conversation, that promise, more than any material possession. After grandfather's passing a few years later, the rift between Alistair and me widened further. He plunged himself deeper into Thorne Holdings, expanding its global reach with even more fervor, as if trying to outrun his grief. I, in turn, retreated. I pursued my degrees in corporate strategy and financial analysis, not because I craved the cutthroat world of finance, but because I was fascinated by the intricate dance of power and numbers, the subtle levers that moved economies. I found a quiet satisfaction in dismantling complex problems, in seeing patterns others missed, in crafting elegant solutions. I joined a boutique consulting firm in London, Ascendant Analytics, where my analytical skills were valued, and my quiet demeanor was seen as a strength, not a flaw. My closest confidants were few but fiercely loyal. There was Uncle Silas, my mother's older brother, a retired architect whose gentle spirit and unwavering integrity were a balm to my soul. He had adored my mother and always treated me like his own son. He understood the nuances of our family dynamics, the unspoken currents beneath the surface. He was my connection to a kinder past, a reminder of the values my mother and grandfather had embodied. Then there was Anya Sharma, my colleague and friend at Ascendant Analytics. Anya was a force of nature, brilliant, pragmatic, and possessed of a dry wit that could cut through any pretension. She was my sounding board, my reality check, and my occasional co-conspirator in navigating the labyrinthine world of corporate consulting. We'd spent countless late nights dissecting financial reports and strategizing for clients, and in the process, had built a bond of mutual respect and trust. She knew about my strained relationship with my father, though not the full extent of the emotional scars. And finally, there was Leo Maxwell, my oldest friend, a journalist whose sharp intellect and unwavering moral compass made him an invaluable ally. Leo and I had been inseparable since primary school, sharing a common love for obscure history books and late-night philosophical debates. He was the kind of friend who would drop everything if you needed him, no questions asked. He'd seen the subtle ways my father's disdain had chipped away at my confidence, and he'd always been a fierce defender of my spirit. Life, for a while, settled into a rhythm. I worked hard, found fulfillment in my challenging projects at Ascendant, and periodically visited Oakhaven, the quiet grandeur of the estate offering a melancholic comfort. My father, in his rare visits, was usually accompanied by a rotating cast of glamorous women, each one younger and more overtly decorative than the last. He rarely acknowledged my presence beyond a curt nod or a dismissive comment about my safe, career choice. He continued to live at Oakhaven, as per grandfather's will, but it was a shell of its former self. The gardens grew wild, the art studio sat empty, gathering dust. The laughter had long since departed. It wasn't until a few months before Silas's fateful call that the first whispers of trouble began. Thorne Holdings, usually a rock of financial stability, started showing odd fluctuations. My father, always a meticulous manager of his public image, became noticeably more withdrawn, more agitated. I caught glimpses of him on financial news channels, his jaw clenched, his eyes restless. Then, the rumors of his latest relationship with Genevieve Dubois, a socialite known more for her extravagant lifestyle than any discernible talent, began to circulate in hushed tones amongst the family. She was different, Silas confided, more tenacious, more demanding than the others. She seemed to have an unusual hold over Alistair, one that made him uncharacteristically vulnerable. I shrugged them off initially. My father's dalliances were his own affair, a consequence of his restless nature and deep-seated emotional emptiness. He'd always compartmentalized his life, keeping his personal excesses separate from his business. But then, the signs grew more troubling. Unexplained trips to exclusive casinos, large withdrawals from accounts Alistair usually kept private, and an increasing desperation in his demeanor. Even through the filters of the press and the carefully curated world of high finance, the cracks were starting to show. I tried once to talk to him. I flew to Oakhaven, unannounced, finding him in the drawing room, a half-empty decanter of scotch on the table beside him. He looked haggard, his usually impeccable suit slightly rumpled. "Father," I began, choosing my words carefully, "I've heard things about Thorne Holdings, about your personal finances. Is everything all right?" He looked at me, his eyes cold and distant. "What would you know about it, Julian? You're a consultant, not a CEO. You deal in theories, I deal in reality. Mind your own business." He waved a dismissive hand, turning back to the flickering television screen, where a financial news channel was dissecting the day's market movements. His words, though familiar, still stung. He was unreachable, lost in his own world of self-importance and denial. I left Oakhaven that day with a heavy heart, the scent of dust and neglect clinging to the air. I knew then that something was deeply wrong, but I never imagined the depths of the impending catastrophe. I underestimated Alistair's capacity for self-destruction, and I certainly underestimated the power of Genevieve Dubois' influence. I never truly grasped how desperate my father had become, how completely he had surrendered his judgment to his desires. And that oversight would cost me, and my mother's memory, everything. The phone call from Silas, terse and devastating, was merely the inevitable culmination of years of my father's unchecked narcissism. Oakhaven was gone, and with it, the last vestiges of the family I once knew. The news of Oakhaven's sale hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless and disoriented. For days, I moved through the motions of my life in a daze, the vibrant hum of London muted, its colors dulled. My work, usually a source of intellectual engagement, felt hollow. I stared at spreadsheets, but my mind was a whirlwind of images. My mother's laughing face in the rose garden, my grandfather's hand resting on my shoulder in the library, the sun setting behind the ancient oak trees, bathing Oakhaven in a golden glow. All gone, sold. Julian, you've barely touched your coffee. Anya's voice cut through my reverie, her brow furrowed with concern. We were in our usual breakfast spot near the office, a bustling cafe where the aroma of fresh pastries usually brightened my mornings. Today, it felt oppressive. I pushed the mug away, the bitter liquid unappealing. It's my father, he sold Oakhaven. Anya's spoon clattered against her saucer. Her eyes widened, instantly understanding the gravity of the statement. She knew how much that estate meant to me, not just as property, but as a connection to my late mother and grandfather. No, she breathed. He wouldn't. He couldn't, wasn't it? Protected. I explained the loophole, the extraordinary circumstances clause he'd twisted, the board he'd manipulated. He used it to pay off his mistress's gambling debts, I finished, the words tasting like poison. Genevieve Dubois. She bled him dry, and he sacrificed our family's legacy, my mother's legacy, to save his own pride and keep her. Anya's expression hardened. That's beyond contemptible, Julian. It's a complete violation of trust, and frankly, of your grandfather's last wishes. What kind of man does that? My father, I replied, a bleak humor in my voice. The kind who called me useless, then proves himself the ultimate fool. The conversation with Anya helped solidify the simmering rage within me. It wasn't just my pain. It was the sheer injustice of it all, the blatant disrespect for everything sacred. I needed to act. My first step was to call Mr. Abernathy, the family solicitor, a man who had served the Thornes for decades and had drafted my grandfather's will. His voice, when he finally returned my call, was tinged with sorrow. Julian, he said, his tone heavy, I truly regret to inform you that despite my best efforts, your father found a way. He convened an emergency board meeting, citing a critical liquidity crisis within Thorne Holdings. A crisis he, himself, largely manufactured by siphoning off funds for Miss Dubois' debts. He presented Oakhaven as an underperforming asset with significant carrying costs that needed to be divested to stabilize the company's financial standing. He twisted the facts, painted a dire picture, and with his controlling interest, he pushed the resolution through. But the will, Mr. Abernathy, grandfather's wishes were explicit. Indeed, they were, Julian. But the board, under your father's influence, argued that the clause regarding extraordinary circumstances, specifically, the protection of Thorne Holdings itself, superseded individual bequests in a time of corporate peril. It was a technicality, a deplorable manipulation of intent, but legally he maneuvered it. He established a limited liability company, Evergreen Properties Limited, to purchase Oakhaven from Thorne Holdings, effectively transferring the asset. Then, that LLC almost immediately sold it on to a consortium. It was a rapid-fire transaction, designed to make tracing difficult and to raise capital quickly to cover Alistair's personal liabilities. My stomach churned. He hadn't just sold it, he'd laundered it through a shell company to obscure his tracks and bypass my grandfather's will even further. The level of deception was breathtaking. Who is the consortium? I asked, my voice tight. That's the frustrating part, Julian. Evergreen Properties dissolved almost immediately after the second sale. The current owner is a series of nested corporate entities. It's a legal maze, designed to be impenetrable. We're trying to unravel it, but it will take time and significant resources. Time, resources, those were luxuries I didn't have. Oakhaven was gone, and my father was already spending the proceeds, undoubtedly on his insatiable mistress. The thought fueled my fury. I thanked Mr. Abernathy, ending the call with a sense of utter helplessness, momentarily overwhelmed by the labyrinthine complexity of my father's machinations. Later that week, I called Leo, my oldest friend. We met at a quiet pub in Islington, the scent of hops and old wood a familiar comfort. Leo listened intently, his journalist's mind already dissecting the story, searching for angles. He called me useless, Leo, I recounted, the bitterness raw. For years, he's chipped away at me, telling me I don't have the guts for business, that I'm too soft. And then he pulls a stunt like this, a desperate, pathetic act of financial self-sabotage, all for a woman who clearly has him wrapped around her little finger. Leo's eyes, usually twinkling with mischief, were serious. He's projecting, Julian. He's the one who's useless now, financially and morally bankrupt. This isn't about you, it's about his own colossal failings. He's trying to drag you down to make himself feel better. But Oakhaven Leo, I pressed, the grief resurfacing. It was grandfather's legacy. My mother's spirit lived there. He's destroyed it. It's an unforgivable betrayal. Then you fight back, Leo stated, his voice firm. You don't let him get away with it. You, Julian Thorne, the quiet strategist, the one who can see angles others miss, you leverage your unique skill set. You prove him wrong. Not just by surviving this, but by overcoming it. Leo's words sparked something within me. He was right. I wasn't my father. I didn't engage in petty ego battles or destructive impulses. My strength lay in observation, in meticulous analysis, in crafting strategies that were subtle, precise, and devastatingly effective. My father saw my introspection as weakness. I would make it my weapon. He thought I was useless. I would prove myself indispensable. I spent the next few days in a blur of focused research. I delved into the public records of Thorne Holdings, scrutinizing financial statements, board meeting minutes, and property transactions. My background in corporate strategy, combined with Anya's technical expertise in forensic accounting, became an invaluable asset. We worked in tandem, Anya's sharp eye for anomalies complementing my ability to connect disparate pieces of information. Look at this, Julian, Anya said one evening, pointing to a convoluted series of transactions involving a subsidiary of Thorne Holdings. These intercompany loans are highly unusual, especially the timing. They coincide perfectly with the reported liquidity crisis and the establishment of evergreen properties. It looks like he engineered the crisis to justify the sale. He needed a credible reason for the board to invoke the extraordinary circumstances clause, I mused, leaning closer to the screen. He couldn't just say, I need cash for my mistress. So he manufactured a corporate threat, knowing his board would prioritize the company's perceived survival above all else. The more we dug, the clearer the picture became. Alistair's personal financial situation had been far more precarious than anyone knew. Genevieve Dubois' debts weren't just significant, they were astronomical, spiraling out of control. My father, blinded by infatuation and desperate to maintain appearances, had funneled company funds, created fictitious loans, and ultimately sacrificed Oakhaven to keep his secret safe and his mistress satisfied. He had committed a series of financial deceits, bordering on fraud, all hidden under the guise of strategic corporate restructuring. One afternoon, a week after Silas's call, I was sifting through archived property records for Kent County, cross-referencing sales dates with articles about Thorne Holdings. I wasn't looking for Oakhaven directly. Mr. Abernathy had said it was untraceable. I was looking for patterns, for the echoes of my father's desperate actions. And then I saw it. A minor real estate publication, one that specialized in high-value properties in the home counties, had run a short piece. Mysterious Consortium acquires Oakhaven estate speculation mounts on future development. The article was brief, noting the sale of the historic Oakhaven estate by a rapidly dissolved LLC to an unnamed private investment consortium. What caught my eye wasn't the information, but a subtle detail in an accompanying photograph, a blurred reflection in one of Oakhaven's windows. It was a reflection of a stylized logo on the side of a parked van belonging to a scaffolding company. I zoomed in, enhancing the image. The logo was distinctive, a soaring eagle. It wasn't a major national firm. A quick search revealed it was a smaller, regional company, Kestrel Scaffolding, based in a town just 10 miles from Oakhaven. Why would a scaffolding company be at Oakhaven after the sale, but before any public announcements of development? Unless, Anya, I called across the office, my voice tight with excitement. Come here, I think I found something. She walked over, her expression curious. I pointed to the logo. Kestrel Scaffolding. Why would they be there? Oakhaven isn't undergoing any visible renovations. Not yet, anyway. Anya, with her uncanny ability to connect obscure dots, tapped her chin. Scaffolding companies often work for developers, Julian. But they also do site surveys for potential buyers or for new owners planning extensive work. If this consortium is genuinely private and doesn't want attention, they'd use local, unassuming contractors for initial assessments. Exactly, I said, my mind racing. And local contractors often have local ties. They talk, or more importantly, their records might reveal who hired them. This was it. Not a direct link to the buyer, but a lead, a fragile thread in the tangled web my father had woven. It was a small, almost insignificant detail, yet it felt like a beacon in the darkness. The thrill of the chase, the intellectual challenge, began to override the grief. My father thought he had buried Oakhaven, made it disappear. But he had left a footprint, however faint. And I, the useless son, was uniquely positioned to follow it. The betrayal still burned, a constant, dull ache, but now it was coupled with a fierce resolve. He had underestimated me. He had underestimated the power of quiet observation, of meticulous analysis, of the drive to reclaim what was mine. The first crack had become a gaping wound, but through that wound, a path to retribution was slowly revealing itself. I would find Oakhaven, and when I did, my father would finally understand the true cost of his betrayal. The game had just begun. The scaffolding company lead, though promising, proved to be a dead end in terms of direct contact with the new owners. Kestrel Scaffolding's records, while revealing they had indeed been hired for a pre-acquisition site assessment at Oakhaven, showed the client as Greenwood Holdings, another shell company. My father had truly gone to extraordinary lengths to bury his tracks. However, the contact person listed for Greenwood Holdings, a Mr. Alistair Thorne, immediately piqued my interest. Elias was my great-uncle, a distant cousin of my grandfather, known for his discretion and his history of acting as a front for various family ventures over the years. He was a loyalist to the Thorne family, but also a man who valued his own peace and quiet and would never willingly become embroiled in scandal. This suggested that my father hadn't just used shell companies. He'd used people, even distant family, as unwitting pawns. The thought sickened me. I decided to approach Elias directly, but with caution. I arranged to meet Elias for lunch in a quiet cafe in his village, a quaint spot nestled in the Cotswolds. He was a man in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and a perpetually worried expression. Over tea and scones, I gently broached the subject of Oakhaven, watching his face closely. "Uncle Elias," I began, my voice calm, "I know you've always been a man of integrity, and I respect that. I also know my father has a way of involving people. Did he ask you to set up Greenwood Holdings for him?" Elias' teacup clattered against its saucer. His eyes darted nervously around the cafe, then settled on me, filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. "Julian, please, I can't talk about this." Alistair made it very clear. "Made what clear, Uncle Elias?" I pressed, my tone gentle but firm. "That Oakhaven was sold, against grandfather's wishes. That the money went to pay off Genevieve Dubois' gambling debts. That he fabricated a corporate crisis to justify it." Elias flinched, his face paling. He wrung his hands, his elderly frame trembling slightly. He said it was for the good of Thorne Holdings. A necessary divestment. He promised me it was all legitimate, Julian. He said he needed someone he could trust, someone discreet, to handle the initial acquisition, to keep it below the radar, while the final negotiations with the consortium were finalized. He promised no harm would come to anyone. I swear, I didn't know the full truth until I saw the headlines. By then, it was too late. I just wanted to help the family, Julian. His voice was a pathetic whisper. "So he used you," I stated, not as a question but a realization. "He used your loyalty, your trust, to facilitate his deception. And now you're exposed, Uncle. If this comes out, your reputation, your peace, everything is at stake." Elias looked utterly defeated. "What do you want, Julian?" "I want the truth, Uncle. I want to know everything you know about Greenwood Holdings, about the consortium, about the real buyers of Oakhaven. I need whatever documents, whatever names you have. This isn't just about my inheritance anymore. It's about my father's blatant disregard for ethics, for family, for truth. And you're now a part of it." He hesitated, a silent battle raging within him. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim file. He gave me these. Instructions, legal documents, a list of contacts. He said they were for administrative purposes. I was just a signatory, but I kept everything just in case. He pushed the file across the table. Please, Julian. Don't let him destroy me too. The file was a treasure trove. It contained details of the consortium, a labyrinthine structure of offshore companies, but with one crucial detail: a specific London-based investment firm, Aurora Capital, acting as the primary fund manager. This was the key. Aurora Capital was a legitimate, if notoriously private, firm. They would have actual human contacts, actual records. Armed with this new information, I called Anya immediately. "We've got a lead," I said, my voice crackling with renewed purpose. "Aurora Capital, they're managing the Oakhaven consortium. We need to find out who their client is, who is ultimately funding this acquisition." Anya's eyes gleamed with professional excitement. "Aurora Capital, that's a big fish, Julian, very discreet, but not untraceable. Give me a few days, we'll start digging." The subsequent days were a blur of intense work. Anya, leveraging her network and forensic skills, began to meticulously unravel Aurora Capital's client base, focusing on recent high-value property acquisitions. Meanwhile, I focused on my father. I knew he was still in London, living in a lavish penthouse apartment he maintained for his business meetings. I wanted to confront him, to see his reaction, to gauge the depth of his delusion. I found him at an exclusive art gallery opening, an event he always attended to cultivate his image as a patron of the arts, even as he was destroying a piece of architectural art himself. He was draped in expensive clothes, surrounded by sycophants, and of course, Genevieve Dubois. She was a vision in emerald green, her laughter echoing a little too loudly through the hushed gallery. I walked straight up to them, a dangerous calm in my stride. "Father," I said, my voice cutting through the polite chatter. He turned, his smile faltering as he recognized me. A flicker of annoyance, then dismissal, crossed his face. "Julian. What a surprise, out of your dusty books for a change." He gestured vaguely at Genevieve. "This is Genevieve Dubois. Genevieve, my son Julian, he's an academic." Genevieve offered a cool, appraising glance, a hint of disdain in her eyes. "Charmed," she purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Indeed," I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "I'm sure you are, especially now that Oakhaven has secured your future, albeit at the expense of my family's legacy." Alistair's face went white. His jaw clenched. Genevieve's smile vanished, replaced by a predatory glint. The sycophants around them shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden, palpable tension. "What are you talking about?" Alistair snarled, trying to regain control. His voice was low, menacing. "I'm talking about the Oakhaven estate, father," I said, my voice rising just enough to ensure a few key ears would prick up. "My inheritance, protected by grandfather's will, which you conveniently ignored. The estate you sold, through a series of shell companies and a manipulated board, to pay off Miss Dubois' staggering gambling debts. Tell me, father, how much was it this time? Another $1 million lost at the roulette table, perhaps. Another 10,000 on a single hand of blackjack." Genevieve gasped, her perfectly made-up face contorting into a mask of fury. "How dare you? You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, but I do," I countered, my gaze fixed on my father's increasingly agitated face. "I know about Evergreen Properties. I know about Greenwood Holdings and how you used Uncle Elias' trust. I know about the manufactured corporate crisis. I know you stripped Thorne Holdings, jeopardized its stability, all to fund this woman's destructive habits and save your own pathetic pride." Alistair lunged forward, grabbing my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "You absolute fool, you'll ruin everything, you're making a spectacle of yourself." He hissed, his face a mask of scarlet fury. "You ruined everything, father," I said, pulling my arm free with a surprising strength I hadn't known I possessed. My voice, though still calm, resonated with a chilling finality. "You disgraced grandfather's memory. You spat on mother's grave. You sacrificed the very foundation of our family for this. This fleeting indulgence." I gestured dismissively at Genevieve, who stood frozen, her venomous stare fixed on me. "You always called me useless, but who's the fool now, father? The one who meticulously unravels your pathetic deceits, or the one who plunges his family into ruin for a woman like this? The silence in the gallery was deafening, broken only by the nervous cough of an art dealer. My father stood there, visibly trembling, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and dawning fear. He looked around, seeing the shocked faces, the whispers beginning to circulate. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and I had, with a few precise words, been the one to dismantle it. The air crackled with shattered illusions and exposed truths. He was humiliated, utterly and publicly. It was the breaking point. The emotional explosion I had anticipated, the raw confrontation that had been building for years, had finally erupted. "You will regret this, Julian," he seethed, his voice barely audible but laced with potent venom. "You will regret this for the rest of your life." "Perhaps," I replied, a small, sad smile touching my lips, "but I doubt it will be as much as you will." I turned and walked away, leaving him and Genevieve in the ruins of his carefully cultivated image. The air outside felt fresh and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating stench of deceit within the gallery. The confrontation hadn't given me Oakhaven back, but it had stripped my father bare, exposing him for the desperate, morally bankrupt man he truly was. The emotional victory, though bitter, was undeniable. He had called me useless, but I had just proven that sometimes, the quietest weapons can cause the most devastating damage. The fight for Oakhaven, however, was far from over. I now knew I had to push harder, dig deeper. This public humiliation was just the beginning of his reckoning. The public confrontation at the gallery exploded in the media. Thorne Holdings stock took a hit, and my father's carefully curated image as a shrewd, upright businessman was shattered. Genevieve Dubois, exposed, fled the city, leaving a trail of furious creditors and a deeply embarrassed Alistair in her wake. The fallout was immense, but it still didn't bring Oakhaven back. The legal maze surrounding Aurora Capital remained, albeit now with increased urgency on my part. "We've got something, Julian," Anya announced one morning, her voice tight with excitement. She was hunched over her multiple monitors, surrounded by printouts and coffee cups, a warrior in the digital trenches. "Aurora Capital. They're notoriously opaque, but I've been tracing their capital sources for the Oakhaven acquisition. It's complicated. There's a major investor, a new entity, a company called Viridian Acquisitions. They've poured an enormous amount of capital into this consortium, far more than Oakhaven's market value. It almost looks like a strategic overpayment." "Viridian Acquisitions," I repeated, a strange prickle of familiarity at the back of my neck. "Any public records? Who's behind it?" "That's the thing," Anya said, turning to face me, her eyes shining with discovery. "It's a very new company, registered just 6 months ago in Dublin. Limited public information. But I managed to pull up the articles of incorporation, and the principal shareholder, the sole director, is a man named J. Alistair." My breath hitched. J. Alistair. Julian Alistair Thorne. Anya watched my face, her own expression shifting from triumph to dawning realization. "Julian, is that a coincidence? Or—" A slow, incredulous smile spread across my face. "Anya," I said, the words barely a whisper. "There's no J. Alistair, not really. Not that I know of in that capacity, but there is a J. Thorne." I paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "It's an alias, Anya, a subtle deflection. Who uses J. Alistair as a company name when their actual name is Julian Alistair Thorne? Someone who knows my father intimately, someone who knows his penchant for grandiosity, and his disdain for my useless nature. Someone who would never suspect me of such a move." Anya's jaw dropped. You mean you bought Oakhaven back, under an alias?" Her voice was incredulous, a mixture of shock and admiration. I nodded, the full weight of my own elaborate deceptions settling over me. "Not directly. I established Viridian Acquisitions in Dublin, carefully structuring it through a network of legal and financial advisors I've cultivated over the years. A quiet, anonymous entity. Then, using my own substantial savings, combined with a significant, discreet loan secured through my contacts at Ascendant Analytics, I acquired a controlling interest in the consortium that bought Oakhaven from my father's shell company, Evergreen Properties. I paid a premium, yes, far more than Oakhaven's market value, but I had to ensure the sale went through quickly, quietly, and definitively. I had to make sure it was mine, truly mine, before my father could liquidate it again or cause further damage. The story flowed out of me, the intricate details of a plan I had been meticulously, obsessively, constructing for months. Even before Silas's call, when I started seeing the cracks in Thorne Holdings and hearing the rumors about Genevieve Dubois, a chilling premonition had settled over me. I'd known my father was capable of anything, that Oakhaven, my inheritance, was vulnerable. I'd started setting up Viridian Acquisitions then, building its financial strength, creating its anonymous facade, positioning it to act swiftly should the worst come to pass. I had leveraged my strategic mind, the very skills my father had always dismissed, to outmaneuver him in a game he thought only he could play. The overpayment Anya found, I explained, was a deliberate move. It created a sense of urgency, made the consortium want to close the deal quickly, and it ensured no other genuine bidders would emerge at that price point. It also provided my father with enough cash to resolve his fabricated liquidity crisis, convincing the board that his decision to sell Oakhaven was a masterstroke, not a desperate act. Anya stared at me, speechless for a moment, then burst into a genuine, delighted laugh. "Julian Thorne, you magnificent, sneaky genius. He called you useless, and you just bought back your own inheritance from under his nose, using his own greed against him." "He provided the opportunity," I said, a flicker of triumph in my eyes. His desperation, his arrogance, his belief that I was too soft to ever challenge him. He never looked for me in the shadows, because he always expected me to be in the light, where he could dismiss me. He never imagined I could play this game, let alone win it. The irony was delicious. My father, the titan of industry, who had built his empire on cunning and ruthlessness, had been outmaneuvered by his useless son. He thought he was selling off a burden, ridding himself of a legacy he no longer valued, and simultaneously demonstrating his ultimate power over me. Instead, he had unknowingly sold Oakhaven back to me, the rightful heir, at an inflated price, effectively funding my reclamation of what was mine. The true twist wasn't just that I bought it back, but how I bought it back. It wasn't an act of desperate scrambling, it was a calculated, preemptive strike, born of foresight and a deep understanding of my father's predictable patterns. I had used my analytical mind, my strategic planning, and my quiet accumulation of resources, all the traits he despised, to achieve this. The knowledge gave me a profound sense of peace amidst the lingering anger. Oakhaven was safe. It was mine, truly and irrevocably. The public humiliation of my father at the gallery had been satisfying, but this quiet, undeniable victory was something far deeper. It was a restoration, a reclamation of a future he had tried to steal, and a vindication of my own path. I knew, however, that the final act of this drama was yet to play out. My father, having been exposed and now financially wounded, would not simply fade away. He would seek retribution, and he would still believe himself to be the ultimate power. The revelation of Viridian Acquisitions and its true owner would be the final blow, the ultimate demonstration of who truly held the reins. "So, what's the next step, mastermind?" Anya asked, her grin wide. "When do you drop the bombshell?" I looked out the window, the London skyline a canvas for my thoughts. "Soon, Anya, very soon, but this isn't just about Oakhaven anymore. It's about proving a point. It's about showing him that respect isn't bought, it's earned. And he lost his the moment he decided to sell off his soul. The game was no longer just about property. It was about defining my own worth, on my own terms, and showing my father the true meaning of power, not the kind he wielded with bluster and deceit, but the quiet, enduring power of integrity and foresight. He had called me useless, and in doing so, had blinded himself to the very skills that would ultimately lead to his downfall. He had forged the weapon, and I was about to wield it. The revelation that Viridian Acquisitions was, in fact, owned by me, Julian Thorne, was the final, devastating blow I had meticulously planned. The public humiliation at the gallery had wounded my father's pride. This would shatter his illusion of control. With Anya's help, I carefully orchestrated the public unveiling, choosing a moment when Thorne Holdings was reeling from the initial scandal, its board members restless and questioning my father's leadership. I scheduled a press conference, ostensibly to discuss recent market manipulations affecting high-value property assets. I invited key financial journalists, the same ones who had eagerly reported on my father's downfall, and ensured Uncle Silas and Leo were present, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. My father, of course, was not invited. The conference room was buzzing with anticipation. I stood at the podium, a calm, collected figure, a stark contrast to the image of the emotionally wounded son the media had painted. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice clear and steady, "thank you for coming. As many of you know, the Oakhaven estate, a property of significant historical and personal value, was recently sold under highly controversial circumstances. The family's legacy was, as it seemed, sacrificed due to what was purported to be a corporate liquidity crisis within Thorne Holdings. I presented the facts methodically, dispassionately. The fabricated crisis, the manipulated board, the shell companies, Uncle Elia's unwitting involvement, and finally, Aurora Capital's consortium. The journalists furiously scribbled notes, their faces a mixture of confusion and heightened interest. "What many of you don't know," I continued, "is that the primary investor in the consortium that acquired Oakhaven, the company that injected the vast majority of the capital, was a firm called Viridian Acquisitions, a company whose identity has, until now, remained shrouded in secrecy." I paused, letting the suspense build. "Today, I am here to reveal the true ownership of Viridian Acquisitions." I looked directly into the cameras, into the eyes of the reporters, into the silent, watchful gaze of Uncle Silas and Leo. "Viridian Acquisitions, the company that purchased Oakhaven from my father's hastily constructed shell, Evergreen Properties, is owned and controlled solely by me, Julian Thorne." A collective gasp swept through the room. Microphones were shoved forward, cameras flashed wildly. Questions erupted, a cacophony of disbelief and excitement. "You bought it back, Mr. Thorne. How did you manage this? Was this an act of revenge against your father?" I raised a hand, calling for silence. "It was an act of preservation," I stated firmly. "Oakhaven was my inheritance, explicitly bequeathed to me by my grandfather, Arthur Thorne, and cherished by my late mother, Alara Thorne. My father, Alistair Thorne, through a calculated and dishonest scheme, attempted to divest this legacy to cover personal debts incurred by his mistress, Genevieve Dubois. He believed he could dispose of what was rightfully mine, believing me to be useless and incapable of challenge." I continued, my voice unwavering. "What he didn't account for was foresight. I saw the signs of his reckless behavior and the vulnerability of Oakhaven long before the sale. I established Viridian Acquisitions as a safeguard, a means to reclaim what was mine, should his actions escalate. I utilized my expertise in corporate strategy and financial analysis skills he always dismissed, to meticulously plan and execute this acquisition. I essentially bought my own inheritance back, using my own resources at an inflated price, effectively funding his desperate attempts to cover his tracks. The funds he received for Oakhaven, which he funneled into Miss Dubois' debts and his own lavish lifestyle, were in essence my own funds returned to me through a circuitous and expensive route. The silence that followed was even more profound than before. The journalists were stunned, their pens poised in midair. The audacity, the quiet brilliance of the maneuver was clearly sinking in. This was not an act of petty revenge, I reiterated, but a profound lesson. My father believed that power was about control, about manipulation, about discarding anything he deemed inconvenient. He taught me that respect must be earned, and he lost mine the moment he betrayed our family's legacy. He called me useless, but I have just demonstrated that true worth lies not in bluster or deceit, but in integrity, in strategic thought, and in protecting what truly matters. Oakhaven is now irrevocably mine, secured under my direct ownership, beyond any future machinations. Outside the conference room, my phone vibrated with a call from Silas. His voice, when I answered, was filled with raw emotion. "Julian, I watched it. My God, Julian, your mother. She'd be so proud. Arthur," he'd be beaming. "You did it, son. You truly did it." The pride in his voice was a balm to my weary soul. Then another call, an anonymous number. I answered, knowing instinctively who it was. You bastard. My father's voice, distorted by fury and static, was barely recognizable. You planned this. You humiliated me. You made a fool of me in front of the entire world. You made a fool of yourself, father, I countered, my voice calm, devoid of triumph, merely stating a fact. I simply allowed the truth to be revealed. I protected what was mine, what you tried to destroy. You called me useless, father. But I used the very intellect and foresight you despised to outmaneuver you completely. I reclaimed Oakhaven, not through your ruthlessness, but through my own quiet strength. You won't get away with this, Julian, he snarled, his voice cracking with impotent rage. Thorne Holdings. I'll destroy it before I let you have it. Thorne Holdings is still your company, father, I said, a hint of sadness in my voice. But its future, like your own, is now precarious. Your board is questioning your judgment, your creditors are circling, and your reputation is in tatters. You sacrificed everything, your integrity, your family, your legacy, for a fleeting indulgence. You sold Oakhaven to pay off a mistress, and in doing so, you sold a piece of your soul. I merely showed the world what you truly became. I hung up, severing the last tenuous thread between us. There was no joy in his downfall, only a profound sense of melancholy. The victory was complete, but it was a victory born of pain and betrayal. Oakhaven was mine again, secured, waiting for me to breathe life back into its hallowed halls. The emotional victory was less about my father's defeat and more about my own quiet triumph, my vindication. I had proven him wrong, not with his methods, but with my own. And in doing so, I had finally earned my own respect, a respect that my father, with all his wealth and power, had never truly possessed. The future was uncertain for Thorne Holdings, but for me, and for Oakhaven, a new chapter had begun. The aftermath of my revelation was swift and decisive. Thorne Holdings, already struggling, faced a crisis of confidence. The board, shamed by the exposure of my father's manipulations and the sheer audacity of my countermove, initiated a vote of no confidence. Alistair, stripped of his power and his carefully constructed image, was forced to step down as CEO, leaving the company in disarray. He retreated from public life, a disgraced and isolated figure, the very fate he had always tried to avoid. Genevieve Dubois, having disappeared, was never heard from again, her destructive presence a fading echo. I, Julian Thorne, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight, not as the useless son, but as the quiet strategist who had outmaneuvered a corporate titan. Offers for consulting projects flooded in, and my firm, Ascendant Analytics, saw a surge in business. But my focus wasn't on corporate accolades or financial gain. It was on Oakhaven. I returned to the estate with a quiet sense of purpose, not as a conqueror, but as a restorer. The gardens were overgrown, the paint on the windowsills was peeling, and the once vibrant home felt heavy with neglect. But beneath the dust and decay, I could still feel my mother's presence, my grandfather's enduring spirit. My first call was to Uncle Silas. He came immediately, his eyes brimming with tears as he walked through the familiar, yet diminished, rooms. "It's still here, Julian," he whispered, running a hand over a dusty mantelpiece. "It needs love, but it's here." Together, we began the long process of restoration. Silas, with his architectural expertise, meticulously planned the repairs, ensuring every detail honored my mother's original vision. I, with the skills my father had once mocked, managed the project, balancing budgets, coordinating contractors, and ensuring the work was done with integrity and respect for the estate's history. Anya and Leo visited often. Anya, with her pragmatic eye, helped me organize the extensive historical documents and archives stored in Oakhaven's library, envisioning ways to digitize and preserve them. Leo, ever the storyteller, began to research the estate's rich history, unearthing fascinating tales of generations of Thorns, tales that deserved to be remembered. As Oakhaven slowly came back to life, so did a part of me that had been dormant for years. I found joy in the mundane tasks, choosing paint colors, selecting new rose varietals for the garden, overseeing the restoration of my mother's art studio. I even rediscovered my own artistic inclinations, sketching the ancient oaks, capturing the changing light on the rolling hills. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the last of the scaffolding was being removed, revealing the newly restored facade of Oakhaven, I stood on the sprawling lawn, a sense of profound peace washing over me. The gardens were once again vibrant, the windows gleamed, and the ancient house pulsed with renewed life. Uncle Silas joined me, a contented smile on his face. "It's magnificent, Julian," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would be so proud." "And grandfather," I added, looking at the sturdy oak where I'd once imagined knights and dragons. "He built this legacy, and I fought to keep it alive." "You did more than fight, Julian," Silas corrected softly. "You showed everyone what true strength looks like. Not the kind that bullies or deceives, but the kind that endures, that protects, that honors." My father eventually faded into obscurity. I never spoke to him again, and he never reached out. The chasm between us was too vast, built on years of his disdain and culminating in his ultimate betrayal. I didn't regret the confrontation, nor the lengths I went to reclaim Oakhaven. It wasn't about revenge, not truly. It was about self-worth, about drawing a line, about protecting what was sacred. Oakhaven became more than just a home, it became a symbol. A symbol of resilience, of reclaiming what was lost, and of the quiet power of integrity. I established a foundation in my mother's name, the Alistair Thorne Arts and Heritage Trust, to support young artists and preserve historical properties, with Oakhaven serving as its primary center for workshops and exhibitions. My mother's studio, once dusty and abandoned, now hummed with creative energy. Life continued, richer and more meaningful. I still consulted, but now with a clearer sense of purpose, often advising on ethical corporate governance, a subtle nod to my past struggles. My relationships with Anya and Leo deepened, forged in the fires of shared experience and unwavering loyalty. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, purple shadows across the revived gardens of Oakhaven, I understood the deepest lesson of this arduous journey. My father believed that power was bought, wielded through wealth and intimidation. He sought respect through dominance, through his grand titles and his vast empire. But in his relentless pursuit of external validation, he lost the internal compass that truly guides a man. He traded his integrity for fleeting pleasures, his family's legacy for a mistress's whims, and his son's love for his own destructive pride. I had been called useless, dismissed, and cast aside. But in the quiet solitude of my own mind, in the meticulous planning and the unwavering resolve, I had found my true strength. I had not sought to destroy my father, but to redeem what he had defiled. And in doing so, I had truly come into my own. The truth, etched into the very foundations of Oakhaven, whispered softly on the wind. Respect isn't bought, it's earned, brick by painful, honest brick.